I'm going to show you how to program the multifunctional timer and also going through the troubleshooting steps if you have any problem going into the programming mode and setting up a specific function. First of all, we're going to assemble simple circuit with multifunctional timer. We're going to connect it to the light, battery, configuration buttons. We're going to use Scotch lock quick connectors to assemble our circuit faster. Multifunctional timer has internal LED built in, but it's a small LED that will not be very visible on this video, so I'm going to connect the external light. So let's assemble the circuit. In the manual on page number 3, you'll find a simple circuit for the 5 amp timer, and I'm going to use the Scotch lock connectors. They're easy to connect and reusable also, so they're a good way to connect your circuit. So just plug the wire, and you only need the pliers, so that's a good thing about the connectors. And here's one wire connected. We'll take the wire from the battery. We're going to connect the black wire. Okay, we're going to now use the configuration board. Output goes to the light. And that's it. Now we have the circuit connected. If I apply the power, the light comes on for a short period of time. This is the function 2. It's a default function, timer on. Timer has the internal LED built in this area, and you should be able to see a little bit of light here. Because of the lighting for the video, it's hard to see LED, but if you just connect a 9-volt battery, you'll be able to configure timer without the external light or the load. Let's now look at the programming procedure. Programming procedure requires to put the timer into the programming mode first, and then program various parameters. There are 6 parameters, as you see here in this table. We don't have to program them all. They are sequentially programmed. So the first thing that we need to do is program the timing, then function, then output, and so forth. If we don't need to change most of them, the most important are the timing and the function, and we're going to go through those steps now. We're going to program the timer to the function number 3. This is just a flasher where the output comes on and off, on and off. We're not going to use the trigger in this example. So here's our table that we need to configure. So the first step is to make sure that there's no power supplied to the timer. We're going to push the button 1 and 2 and hold it. We're going to hold those two buttons. Alternatively, you can ground the green and white wires. And we're going to supply the power. And output comes on. And it will stay on until you release the buttons. Once you release the buttons, the output stays on for about 3 seconds. So that tells us the timer now in a programming mode. Don't disconnect the power, because once you disconnect the power, the timer goes into operational mode. So the first thing to do is configure the timing, T1. So we're going to push the button 1 for a number of seconds that we want to set it to, for let's say 2 seconds. If we need to set the number T2, we can also push it for a duration that you need. Once it's done, we need to move on to the next step, functions. And to do that, to move to the next step, you need to push 2 buttons together. Once you push them, the output comes on for about 3 seconds, and now we're in a function configuration mode. We're going to push the white or the button number 1 for 3 times, because this is the function number 3. 1, 2, 3. And we're not gonna configure the rest of the parameters and the trigger. We're not going to configure that, so we can just leave it as is. And we're going to disconnect the power. Now we're going to reconnect the power, and the timer is going to into operational mode, and it's going to blink on and off. You should be able to tell that internal LED is also comes on. It's really faint, but you should be able to see it here. Internal LED connected between the ground and the output, so it just shows you that there's output, there's a voltage on the output wire. Now, if you need to change the programming, you just go through the same programming steps again. So we're going to put the timer, we're going to disconnect the power, push 2 buttons, or ground white and green, connect the power, light comes on for until you release the buttons. Release the button, stays there for about 3 seconds. And now we're back in the timing. We can change the timing to, let's say, 1, 2, 3 seconds. We're going to move on to the function. And to move to the next step, we're going to push 2 buttons at the same time and release. So now we're in a function mode. We're going to keep it function number 3. If you want to change it, you can change it. Let's say we change it back to 3. We're still back in 3. And let's say we want to change the output mode to the gradual. So to move on to the next step from the function, we're going to again push 2 buttons at the same time. We moved on to the next step, which is output mode, and we're going to push the green or button number 2 once and disconnect the power. Now if we connect the power, we should see our light cycles, but it will gradually increase the brightness and decrease it. So it cycles on and off with just a gradual output. To reconfigure the timer, you just need to put timer back into the programming mode, going through the steps to change all the parameters, and you can change and you will reconfigure the timer. But sometimes it's easier to reset the timer to the default factory configuration and start over. To do that, you'll find the procedure in the manual. You'll also find the default configurations. So let's go through those steps. The steps are pretty simple. You disconnect the power. We're going to ground white and green or push button 1 and 2 and supply the power. We're going to wait until light comes on. So this is how you put the timer into the programming mode. But the difference here, we're going to disconnect the power and keep holding the button 1 and 2 and connect it again. And we'll do it 5 times. So this was the 2nd time. Here's the 3rd time. 4th time. And on the 5th time, you'll see the light will blink. Once it blinks, you disconnect the 2 buttons and you reset the timer completely. So now when we disconnected the power and connected it back, it should blink once. It means it's back in the function in the default settings, function number 2. T.2 seconds, instant output, normal output, and so forth. So again, you push the buttons 1 and 2 and connect the power 5 times until you see the light blinks, and you're back in the default settings. Let's go through a couple of troubleshooting steps. The first thing, if you supply the power, you should see the output. So if the output doesn't come out when you supply the power, there's something wrong with this circuit. The first thing we're going to check I'm going to use a multimeter in continuity mode. I'm going to check the ground from the power supply to our black wire coming to the timer. Okay, it connects. Then I'm going to check the red. It conducts also. So that's one thing. The second thing, I will need to check if the yellow wire connects to my output. And you also need to check if your output load properly connected, means it connects to the ground with a proper wire, and the output goes to the yellow. Watch the LED in a timer, so that should turn on. So if you see that turn on but your output doesn't turn on, that means there's something wrong with your output connection. So the next step in troubleshooting is to understand why you can't put the timer into the programming mode. You supply the power, you have the output, but you can put the timer into the programming mode. So the first thing you'll need to check is your button black wire is spliced into the timer black wire, and you can use the multimeter to ensure conductivity. Same thing with the white and green wires. Properly connected and securely connected. Use the multimeter to test that. If you use your own buttons, verify that those buttons are either normally closed or normally open, and they are securely connected. Again, use the multimeter to test those buttons. That's very important. Without grounding the white and green wires, you cannot put a timer into the programming mode. So if you ground those, if you push button 1 and 2 or ground the wires and supply the power and the timer doesn't stay on, it means it's not sensing those two wires are connected to the ground. Once it senses that, disconnecting the power, once I'm pushing 2 buttons now, once it senses that those 2 buttons are connected, it supplies the power to the output, and it stays on until you release both of the buttons. So I released one, it stays on until I release the second one, the last one, then it stays for 3 seconds. So this is tells you it's in the programming mode. Don't continue with your other steps if you cannot pass this step. If that step doesn't work, the rest of the steps are not going to work. If you want to verify the trigger wire is properly functions, you can put the timer in a test mode, and to do that we're going to put it into the programming mode by pushing 2 buttons, applying the power, releasing the buttons and pushing them one more time. So we pushed it while the light was on. Let me show you this one more time. So we're going to push 2 buttons, we're going to supply the power. Normally, if we release the buttons, the light would stay on for 3 seconds. If during those 3 seconds you push 2 buttons one more time, you put timer into the test mode. So we released and pushed it one more time and released. Now, if we push the button 1 and 2, the light just going to come on. So we can test the buttons, and also we can test the blue trigger wire by connecting it to the positive. So when you connect to the positive, the output will come on also. To exit, you just disconnect the power.